All right. Welcome everyone to the Mega Alumni Podcast. My name is Nehal. I'm a graduate student at the Ohio State University from the Mechanical, Aerospace, and Nuclear Engineering Department. And as a part of Mega, the graduate student body, we are doing this alumni podcast, hopefully to network our current grad students with alumni from our department. And the guest that we have today is Ben Kelly. He graduated from OSU a while back, and then since then has worked at SpaceX, has been the CEO of the launch company. And without further ado, I will let Ben get into the details of his career trajectory since OSU. Ben, over to you.
Great, thanks. Yeah, appreciate you having me. Yeah, just to touch briefly. So I did a master's degree at Ohio State, and then I went on. I got hired out of school to be a launch engineer for SpaceX. And so at the time, they were building Vandenberg Air Force Base Slick 4E. So it's one of the sites over on the south part of base there, and essentially it was an old Titan program pad. They were refurbishing it, and so I came in as what's called a responsible engineer in the launch department, launch and test. And it was my job to be given a few critical ground systems and design, build, test, operate. And through that effort, I became lead engineer for the launch campaign. So some of my colleagues would go down the street to be in the command center. They're on the consoles, everything you see on the movies, right? They're on the consoles, on the radios, doing their thing. My job was staying on the pad with the techs, and we were essentially the ones rolling the rocket to the pad, hooking up all the fluid systems, making sure everything was good to go, stand the rocket up. And then if there was a problem, I ran what's called the red team. And so we would go back and we would fix whatever thing was wrong, and then get out of there. And that was a really cool experience. We had our first launch out of there September in 2013. And then I kind of did a few more projects with that. I ended up leaving the company, but they hired me back like, I don't know, a couple months after I left, and had me do the landing barges. So they build, I think everybody's fairly familiar with these now, but they built these barges to land the first stage of the rocket on out at sea. And again, it was my job to kind of be the lead field engineer, the lead coordinator, I call myself the field general, to make sure all these designs that were coming in were serviceable. Usually they were not. We would change them, fix them, whatever, adapt them in the field to our situation, and then work with technicians and other engineers to get everything built. On missions, I was deck boss, and so be my job we literally would back a boat up to the barge and swing over on ropes and set everything up, get everything ready to go. And then after a rocket landed, try to come over and get everything secured. And after that, I moved back home to Alaska, where I am now. I started a couple businesses, but the one that kind of took off was the launch company. And essentially it was designing spaceports, test ports, and physical ground and flight hardware for different rocket companies and satellite companies. It was a lot of fun. It was a fully bootstrapped company. We had no outside investors. We ran on revenue. I sold that in 2021 to a company called Voyager Space. And then I left the company in June of last year, so June of 2023. And now I'm on a sabbatical and enjoying life and looking at whatever's coming next.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Sounds great. And I think right now I remember seeing on your website you are an entrepreneur in residence at the Alpha Accelerator at the University of Alaska, I believe. So
Yep, yep.
what does that
So so this last spring, the a group at the University of Alaska called and asked if I'd be interested in being an entrepreneur in residence. And similar to your question, I said, well, what's that entail? What is that? And essentially, I do a lot of work in the Alaska startup community, helping entrepreneurs, figure out their unit economics or put together a business plan or into whatever. And they said, well, hey, you're doing this anyway. We have a position that we need to fill, quarter time type position where we just want you to work with these young entrepreneurs in the community. And I was like, cool, something I'm doing anyway and enjoy doing. And so I've really enjoyed that work, and it's been a lot of fun to be part of this group. It's called the Center for Economic Development at UAA. We run a really cool program that we just wrapped up in December called Upstart Alpha. And that takes people from all over the community. You don't have to be a college student. Anybody across the state of Alaska that wants um, essentially coursework and help in like pushing their idea forward. So we had people who had bought local businesses. They're in their 20s or 30s, and they're trying to run this business that they, used to be an employee at, but now they've bought it and they own it, and it's a whole new set of stresses. And we had people working on AI startups. We had people, working on, somebody had a food product. We had people working on maternal care for postpartum, mothers. And so like very diverse set of people working on a lot of different business types. And I just think that makes it really fun. And so mostly it's doing what I like to do anyway, which is hang out and talk startups with people.
Got it. Got it. So I guess we'll circle back a little bit to the entrepreneurship stuff and your journey through that. But before we get into that, I think the thing I was interested in that uh, how did you get into SpaceX and how did you decide that SpaceX was the right kind of company for you as you graduated with your master's degree? Because I see that your
Sure.
research at OSU was like some micro nano fluids, and then you had some you worked during your undergrad as well. You had some under the Alaska Space Grant program. You had a project, I believe. So
Yeah.
that's probably where you got your first taste for maybe some of that kind of work. And so
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. That's an interesting question. I mean, look, when I graduated from Ohio State, it was very much a beggars can't be choosers sort of situation.
right,
It's like when you ask like, how did I know SpaceX was the right company for me? They called me and offered me a job. That's how I decided they were right. No, it was a little deeper than that, but not much. And I had actually turned down two other offers before SpaceX had ever even called me. Because it's just one of those things where I knew it wasn't the right type of work, it wasn't the right cultural fit, they weren't mission oriented. And I actually said no to those, and then a couple months later started talking to SpaceX. I actually on my I'll send you a link and you can include it in the notes if you want. I wrote the story of how I got the job at SpaceX.
okay,
It involves Dance Dance Revolution. It
okay,
involves
okay,
like, yeah, it's pretty funny actually. But the short version is I sent an application at spacex.com/careers. I sent out, like every student, dozens and dozens of these things, right?
right,
Just spamming the internet. It's
right,
like
right,
carpeting it with these like digital docs. And mostly for nothing back. And I don't think I heard from SpaceX for a couple months probably. And then I got a call out of the blue. I was in Scott Lab. I was in my little broom closet, grad school office and toiling away on this and that. And they had me do the interview right there, just like, here we go. And really what it came down to was I was like, man, this is really exciting work. When I flew out there and I met everybody at this kind of impromptu dinner party that I fell into and played Dance Dance Revolution at, I was like, these are my people. Like that group specifically at that launch site was just very humble, extremely high ability, and didn't take things too seriously. It wasn't life or death, and we worked exceedingly hard. I mean, probably the hardest I've ever worked. And I grew up flying as a bush pilot, but like, um, but good humor about it and generally kept things in perspective. I'm still friends with a lot of those people and talk to them, some of them every single day, 10 years later. So, um, I knew though, I was going in with open eyes. I knew that it wasn't a forever job for me.
mm,
It's not the type of place that'll ever tell you like, hey, good job, take a break,
right,
then be like, hey, good job, go faster
right,
now. And
right,
that's really fun and cool in your
mm-hmm,
early to mid 20s. And this may be shocking to anybody who decides to listen to this and they're not in their 30s, but once you hit your
right,
30s, it's like, this is less cool, perhaps.
right,
Start thinking about like, I had no friends outside work, I had no hobbies. I was sleeping 3 to 4 hours a night. My diet and exercise were just in the gutter. And your adrenal responses are just constantly just you know so you just
right,
like adrenal fatigue. I mean, it was just, yeah, it was tough. And so I love the experience and I love the people I met there and all the memories, but I was also like, I got my enjoyment and my time, and I was happy
mm-hmm,
to move on. So
right, right. And So is there some more details you can give about what kind of work you were doing while you were there?
Oh yeah,
Like yeah,
yeah,
uh,
sure, yeah. It was. I mean, you brought up Space Grant. It was kind of similar to the undergrad work I did at Space Grant. You come into a launch site, and this is the launch department. Launch and test are similar, but we're building a launch site. So it's like, hey, this is what we need, and it was not super well defined, to be perfectly honest. They're like, here are the schematics we have in work. Here's the parts list we have in work. Um, Go, and that was pretty much it for onboarding and training.
got it.
And so that's, I think, why we developed such strong bonds, because there are people that had
Right,
started earlier, and they can kind of help you get up to speed. And then to make it up to them, you stay late and help them with their projects. And it's just like this kind of give and take, and you're all trying to get through it together. But there was no formal education in how to build a launch site. The formal education was like, we're going to throw you in this ocean during, a tropical storm, and it will come back for you next week. If you're still treading water, like, you can stick around. It's kind of the
right,
analogy.
right,
So day to day, it would be, everything from you're designing a fluid system, you're laying out P&IDs, pressure and instrumentation diagrams, fluid schematics, selecting parts, doing, any sort of thermal fluid type analysis. Maybe you're doing some fan flow, maybe you're looking at heat transfer in this like storage vessel, and crank it full of nitrogen to 6,000 psi, whatever. And with the goal of like servicing this rocket that's going to be out on the pad, and making sure you can hit these like required pressures and temperatures at the interface to the rocket. um, but then once you're done with design, you got to go build it. So we had teams of welders and technicians, and we then translate these schematics into physical three-dimensional designs that can be built and integrated. And then we give them to the technicians, and they yell at us because the designs aren't any good. And you'll work with them, you make it better. And then now it's built. Now you go and install it, and you test it. And we wrote all the activation procedures for like component by component to subsystem to full system activations at every level, running all of those. And I just enjoyed that so much. I started helping out other people with it. And that's kind of how I ended up being lead engineer. Just, I mean, we were all working long days, but especially when you're working like 14 to 17 hours a day, trying to help everybody get their tests done and do everything. And you start learning about the other systems. And so, you know, it sounds like a cool thing, but my reward for being named this was like getting yet a third full-time job, which was, now I wrote this huge procedure called 4.500. And it was literally from when they open the door at the hangar and say, rocket's yours, like how to roll it out, how to take care of it, make sure it's staying pressurized, all these different calls, getting the pad ready, how much of the pad can be pre-prepped as the rocket comes down the road, getting it lined up, pinning it in, lifting it, hooking up all the critical fluids. Like, and I'd never done any of that before. And so
right,
it's like this blank procedure, and it's like step one, open hangar door, right? And
right,
it's like
right,
step two, and then step three is launch, right? It's like,
right,
and then you got to start filling it out from there.
right.
But SpaceX had launched Falcon 9, going to be the first launch of a new variant of Falcon 9, but
Okay,
they had launched Falcon 9 out of the Cape. And so even though that launch site is very different, I took their procedure, I made friends with their lead engineer. I was like, hey, now all I have to do is adapt to this to our situation. And that was a lot more tenable. That was something I could actually figure. It's still very hard, but it's something that you could at least figure out.
right,
You weren't going to skip any critical steps. And so
right.
that was pretty much it. That was how it was.
Got it, got it. So yeah, and as you mentioned that towards the tail end of your time at SpaceX, and you ended up taking up the lead engineer role. And as you said that you were kind of given these broad tasks, and I guess you got some experience in leading a team, figuring out a lot of things without a lot of specifics being given.
Yes.
And from that, so I was curious, but you also said that it was like working really long hours.
Yeah.
What made you decide of like, you know, starting up your own company, founding something?
Mhm.
And what took you to that? And also curious that why you decided to stick in that same kind of industry, because the launch
Good
company
question.
was kind of, yeah. So,
Good question. Um, so, so my dad had a small air cargo company. And so I just always assumed I would be. I think entrepreneur is a really fancy word for what I assume. I like having time flexibility.
Mm,
So like I don't really enjoy people calling me and saying, "Where are you?" Well, you know
right,
what? It's leave me alone, right? It's like as long as the thing is getting done, I don't really. And this is why I love grad school so much. My advisor
right,
was very like, "Hey, as long as you're getting done what we need done, like whatever, I don't need to see you." It's like fantastic. And so just go sit in the Oval and read a stack of white papers and eat a sandwich and enjoy a sunny
right,
day. Like I like being able to have that flexibility. And so I'd always had that growing up with my dad. We flew groceries to remote parts of Alaska and fuel and stuff. And I just liked that. And I like being of service to people. I liked, bringing people food and gasoline and things that they needed to survive. I thought was really rewarding. And so I like the service aspect of entrepreneurship a lot. Um, I guess the thing I knew is that I never really wanted to leave Alaska. I just
mm,
didn't want to work in oil and gas. And
got it,
so I left, I came to Ohio State, and then, went and worked for SpaceX. But then it was kind of like, man, how do I get back to Alaska? And so I moved back up and was living on savings and starting a different business, and it didn't work out. But the entire time I was starting that business, all these space companies were calling me and asking for help because
right,
friends from SpaceX would quit and go to Firefly and Astra and
right,
Relativity and all Blue Origin. And then they'd be like, oh man, let's call Ben and ask him. And
right,
the way I kept my first company kind of moving, even though it had nothing to do with space, was by consulting to space companies. And so I was
mm,
like, yeah, exactly. I was like, maybe this is the business. And so I think you very astutely put your finger on is like, I didn't really want to because
mm,
like long hours, fairly toxic, like white male dominated space. I mean, it's just like, it's a little exhausting. And so I said, I really don't want to do this, but the real motivating factor was that my other business wasn't working out. And I mean, I was hungry,
right,
literally. So I'm
right,
on
right,
some
right,
food. And so I started just doing those jobs and ended up changing the name to the launch company. And we took on bigger and bigger things. But that is exactly what we're doing. We're designing systems and ground systems. And then eventually we moved into flight hardware and just kept kind of chipping away and doing cooler stuff. And really the boundary around it for me was like, it was kind of like, I only want to do this if it's enjoyable.
right,
I if members of my former team watch this, I would say like they would agree. Like sometimes we work more than 40 hours, but then we took breaks, right? We weren't working 100 hours. We're working 120 hours a week, which is insanity when there's 168 hours in a week.
right,
Uh, like it was like, yeah, 40 or 50. And it's like, okay. And then we'd hit a big milestone, we'd take breaks. In summer, we had what we called summer Fridays because summer in Alaska is so glorious. It's like
right,
get out and enjoy your life. And so we kind of had this mantra of like, and we would say this to clients. We're like, there's no point in going to space if we're all miserable when we get there, right? Like,
right, 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 right,
and as you get a little more philosophical with it, it's like we do the work, but the work kind of does us too, right? The way
right,
in which we do these things makes who we are. And I was just sick of doing things at full speed and half-ass.
right,
And so even with doing launch company, I had a lot of kind of like conditions around it. But what's funny is I was actually telling this story a couple of days ago. It started becoming a differentiating factor for the company. Our
mm,
clients would call us and be like, "We love working with you guys because you're so nice to us, and you guys never panic, and like you don't scream at us." I'm like,
right,
"Yeah, why would we do that?"
right,
But that's aerospace. Well,
right,
specifically startup aerospace.
right,
It was like everybody's screaming at each other, tensions are high, blah blah blah, and I was just like, "We're not going to do that." Like, I remember I had this client call me on a Saturday and be like, "I need this thing today," and
right,
I was like, "Today, huh?" And he's like, "Yeah." He goes, "If not today, then first thing tomorrow morning." I go, "But if I do that, like, what are you gonna do with it?" I was like,
right,
"If you can tell me what you're gonna do with it, I'll drop what I'm doing right now. I'll knock it out. Like if there's a real need, of course I will support you.
Right.
And he couldn't even tell me what he would do with it. He just wanted it. And I
Right.
was like, sorry, buddy, we'll talk on Monday. And I just hung up. And it felt insane. And later he was like, yeah, sorry, I was really cranked up. I got too stressed out. Like, it's funny what like remaining the reasonable one can do. It has this calming effect.
Right.
And so anyway, that's kind of how I managed to. I didn't want to go back to it, but that was kind of how I
Right.
managed to do it in my humanity.
Got it. Yeah, and I was so while I was kind of looking up at all the stuff you've done, I saw your website and I saw that you have a wonderful newsletter as well, where you also
Oh,
kind of I
thanks.
think go over some of this, share some of your experiences, and it was interesting to see like the thing that you pointed out about going to space and at the same time, like not losing like the stuff that we're doing here on Earth while we're trying to get to space and like have all of these really shoot for the star kind of goals. So yeah, that's really interesting to listen, and I'm curious that on a day to day in that kind of an industry, like it, as you said, staying calm is still kind of hard, and an industry that's adapting so quickly. How do
Yeah,
you kind of ground yourself, or what did you do to ground yourself, your team? Like, did you end up having some sort of company value system set in place when you started out? Did that
yeah,
evolve over time? Yeah.
yeah. That's a really great question. And thanks for reading the newsletter. Yeah, I we had company values. We had a core set of company values, but a funny thing about company culture is not what management says it is. It's what the employees say it is, right? Like, so United Airlines, their thing is fly the friendly skies. I have rarely found anybody to be super friendly at United. No disrespect, but like I just haven't had a great experience. And so, but then it's almost ridiculous. They've got these things that say fly the friendly skies, and it's like it almost makes it more shocking than if they just said nothing. They're like, oh, well, everybody's having a bad day at United. And so it was one thing when it's like we have these core values and this is what we're gonna do. But then it's like, well, what are we really gonna like live, and what are we really willing to do? And so we would do things like, and this was new experience for a lot of people. Like, I have a friend that runs a breathwork course, and we signed everybody up. Anybody who wants a seat, we'll pay for it in this like 8-week breathwork course. And then we met as small groups and talked about it. And it's wild to listen to engineers be like, well, I mostly thought this was, blah, 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 blah. It's like, but man, if I don't feel better and calmer, and, it's like, we did a meditation challenge. We do, but the thing that's funny is like, you do all these things. And I think those things are really important, but also like, if we had that at the launch site and we're working 17 hours, whatever, a day, and then they're like, does anybody want to come to yoga to try to de-stress? It would have been like the fly the friendly skies thing, right?
Right.
You also have to have a decent day to day to day like experience.
Mm-hmm.
And one that moves in like ebbs and flows. And we were big on seasonality. Like you can't really see out my windows, but there's like 3 or 4 feet of snow out here. So like, in wintertime, we're a little more, buckled down and doing this and that. And then in summertime, when the sun comes back, it's like, let's go, and like you try to kind of honor that. So I think those things went hand in hand. But when I was in it, before I had my company, I really struggled. I didn't know how to separate my worth
Mm.
from the work that I was creating. So if I built something and it didn't work, then I was bad,
Right.
right? And it's
Right.
like, well, no, you tried to build this thing and it didn't work. Like, let's
Mm.
try again. But nobody around me was like echoing or saying that at all or like reflecting that value. They were like, yeah, you're right. You are bad. Like, go
Mm.
go fix it. And
Mm.
so that was something that I had to kind of come through just a lot of like, feeling bad about, the things that I was building and they wouldn't work. And I'd
Right.
go and try again and they'd finally work and you don't even feel good because why didn't it work the first time? And it's just like, man, life's too short for that. I don't want to feel that way.
Right.
And I certainly don't want young engineers to think that's a normal way to feel.
Right. Right. Makes sense. Makes sense. And the I guess kind of tangential to this, the other thing I was thinking of is that as an engineer, as you mentioned, that even going through grad school and even undergrad, like you're focused on all these really technical subjects, but there are these aspects of leadership, balancing your life, understanding a lot of things, dealing with failure, especially, right?
Yeah.
Because the systems are going to fail. You're going to have designs that are flawed. You need to keep working on it, keep iterating on it. Uh, what kind of soft skills do you think current grad students can all like start seeking out right now itself, and maybe lifestyle changes, stuff like that?
Yeah.
And then as they get into like their careers, what should they seek out? Any general advice that you have?
Yeah. I think kind of the overarching thing is like, don't bet on tomorrow. So don't be like, well, I'm just going to sacrifice my health and my sanity and my youth now.
Hmm.
But then later it'll pay off. It's like, maybe, but like, again, like at SpaceX, they were never going to be like, Ben, you've really been hustling. Why don't you take a breath? They're going to be like, hustle even more. This is really good for us, And
Right.
so like learning to kind of advocate for yourself and take your own breaks and learn how to surround yourself with people that also respect that
Mm-hmm.
and not everything's perfect. Maybe you go and take, a couple jobs and it's like this really sucks and learning to recognize that in yourself. Like, does this feel good? Does this feel bad? And learning to discern that I think is like a really important and not talked about practice. But I think the single most important thing for engineers to do is learn to communicate
Hmm.
and specifically learn to listen.
Right.
And speaking also important. Engineers struggle sometimes to communicate ideas well, but even worse than that, a lot of engineers I've worked with struggle to hear other people's ideas
Hmm.
or other perspectives and actually internalize them and consider them. And I think like an engineer that can communicate can like take over the world. It's like
Right.
it's
Right.
rare. And I think that that's really really important. But just like kind of being in touch with yourself and not if I was only worried about what other people thought, I'd still be at SpaceX
Hmm.
because that was the type of thing you'd be on an airplane and somebody see your T-shirt and they're like, "Wow," and it's like, "Yeah,
Right.
blah 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 blah
Right.
blah." But that really only it's like eating junk food. Like it's really fun for a little bit, and then pretty soon you got a stomach ache, and you're just like, I need a salad. It's
Right.
like you get a long walk and a nap. And
Right.
so, learning to like do things for your own motivation, I think is really important. It's really hard, but it's really important to practice. It's a
Hmm.
practice. You don't always get it right.
Right. Right. Absolutely. And kind of tying in that thing that you said about communication, the other thing that I also feel that oftentimes I hear people talk about, like students have graduated, or maybe even professors at times, that like engineers need to definitely communicate better. And then also it comes down to like writing, and then
Yeah.
in written communication as well. And I was wondering, since you had the opportunity of like saying, writing down all these procedures and doing all those things, do you think writing is also an important aspect for, I suppose, any engineer to maybe slow down, think, and maybe that'll also allow people to listen more, because you need to process and write things down? So
I think that's really good insight. 95% of the engineering I do, and something that I help other engineers do and other companies do, is create what are called design reviews.
hmm,
So essentially, you go from a concept to 25 to 30% kind of idea to a preliminary design around 60 to 70% to a final design 90, 95%. And that comes with complete drawings, build instructions, procedures, everything you need. And it's funny because a lot of things seem like really good ideas until you start going through like the design review process. And to your point, you got to write it down. You got to do the math. And it's like, oh, well, this would work, but it'll cost $50 billion. And it's like,
hmm,
well, then is it actually a good idea? It's like, well, if it
right,
saves $100 billion, maybe, but
right,
usually not. And so, yeah, written communication is really important. One of the things I think they do this at Amazon and at Blue Origin, at least at Amazon, is they write memos before
hmm,
big meetings. And it's like, this is what I want to discuss. This is how I'm thinking about it. These are my assumptions, blah, blah. And I've never seen that replicated anywhere else. And I think it's really interesting. When we do design reviews, well, what we used to do is we would send the slides a few days beforehand. People ostensibly will look at them, read them through, they make notes, make questions. And then when you come to meet, you're talking about the thing. So it's an efficient meeting. It's like, cool, we've all
right,
reviewed it. Now let's talk. Versus like, let me present this information to you for the first time and you're on your phone or like just zoning out and not listening.
right.
I use Loom videos now. And so
Hmm.
I record screen share. I walk people through the design and I email it to them and I just go, hey, whenever you get a chance, watch this and then get back to me.
Right.
And that sort of combination of like verbal and written is really important because like we wouldn't want to sit here and talk about, you know, I don't know, incompressible, fluid dynamics
Right.
and this and that, and blah, blah. It's like, hey, let's, talk. Well, it's like, we're not going to talk about tensors and,
Right.
all these different things like we're going to write those down. And
Right.
so putting those two things together, I think is really critical. Yeah.
Hmm.
And I think engineers are really bad at it generally,
Right. Right.
me
So I think
included.
that's definitely a desirable skill to acquire, and make yourself marketable, I think,
Yeah,
I suppose, right?
definitely.
Absolutely. And kind of going on the tangent of being marketable when you're looking for jobs. I know you wanted to talk about this a little bit of acquiring skill sets that make you relevant in the current market. And I was
Mhm.
wondering what advice you had based on the Ben that was applying for jobs, let's say a long time ago, and
Yeah.
the advice that you would give as a recruiter because you were the CEO of of the launch company, and what you seeked out when you were hiring engineers.
Yeah. Number one thing, and it's not even close, it is curiosity.
Hmm.
Uh, you cannot teach curiosity. I'm
Right.
talking about like actual curiosity.
Right.
Like a question I used to ask a lot is be like, hey, have you ever worked with pressure transducers or tell me about some tests? And they'd be like, oh yes, I've worked with all this test equipment, blah, blah, blah. I go, oh, cool. Like what? And they would tell, and I'd let them pick and they'd be like, I worked with this, RTD.
Hmm.
I'd be like, oh, cool. What does RTD stand for?
Right.
And I'd just pretend I was born yesterday. What is an
Right.
RTD? And they'd
Right.
be like, oh, well, you don't know what an RTD is. And I go, yeah, what does it stand for?
Right.
Right. And I go, and how does it work? And is that the same thing as a thermocouple? And they'd be like,
Right.
oh, well, and I'm like, hey, you're the one teaching me.
Right.
But that like real curiosity, you can't get like you can develop it on your own, but you can't usually like foster it in somebody else.
Hmm.
It's something that has to come from inside. I think as engineers and scientists, like we should just be very naturally curious people. And so get a little scared of engineers that aren't curious. Um, and then kind of like not knowing but being willing to find out. And this was something
Hmm.
that was like really big in my SpaceX interview. I remember I said two things that I said that I felt like kind of were like little secrets that I didn't know at the time, but I just happened to say the code word. They
Right.
asked me, I don't even remember what it was, but they asked me some like hard question. And I go, man, I don't know, but here's how I think it'll work. And then I
Right.
walked through my thinking
Right.
and they were like, awesome.
Right.
Because we're solving problems that don't have solutions. Like I
Hmm.
can't flip through the book and then be like, oh, it's right here. It's in the book. Like, especially in the age of AI, right? It's like if it's in the book, like you don't have a job.
Right.
And so like that was a big thing. And then the other one was saying, I don't know, but I'll find out. And
Hmm.
then, reporting back a day later and be like, this is what I learned and blah, blah, and you're sharing it with everybody. And then saving that information in a place where it can be accessed again.
Right.
Um, that was big at launch company. We used an app called Guru that
Okay.
was originally meant for, or it's meant for all sorts of things, but it's like quick information, like databasing,
Hmm.
and it was meant for like people who were running help desks, so they could look up,
Ah.
coupon policies and refund policies and stuff really quickly. But we just started putting engineering information in there.
Ah.
And
Okay.
so when a junior engineer would be stuck, the first rule was Google it. Like,
Right.
don't come and ask for help. Like,
Right.
ask Google. If you can't reason through what you found on Google, then check Guru. If it's not in Guru, ask
Right.
for help. We'll work it out together. But then it's your job to go put it in Guru so nobody ever has to ask that question again. Like,
Right.
we're only asking new questions. We're moving forward. And
Right.
um, yeah, I think that was a pretty effective like way to do it.
Got it. Got it. Uh, the other thing that I kind of, I guess, wanted to also discuss or talk about a little bit as as you were leading the startup space, and you were, as you said, like a little bit of the decision was coming in that the business lied there. You could clearly see that there's business coming in there, so that was a decision that you made. And then eventually, as you mentioned, that it got acquired, I believe last year, right? So uh what kind of, and you said that you really help, you really enjoy helping young entrepreneurs find that business, find that uh, that goal that they really want to achieve. And so I was
Mhm.
wondering, when did, like, why, or how would you decide that it's time for my kind of baby, or like my idea to get acquired, or
Mm.
I'm ready to start off maybe looking at new things. And this seems to be, like in an autopilot mode, where maybe now
Mm.
this doesn't need that kind of investment from me, which it initially did. uh, so curious
Yeah,
about that. Yeah.
that's a great question. I think it goes back to like knowing, practicing, what do you want and what feels good, and whether you can explain to anybody else or not, like just, hey, this is what makes sense for me. And it'd be a very long story to tell everything, but essentially, like, having bootstrapped this like company up, I was thinking that having a larger company bias would give us more resources, more connections, more opportunity. And frankly, we were coming, out of COVID, and it's like wouldn't hurt to have a little more resiliency and backup. You
Right.
know, um, had teammates, with kids and mortgages and car. Like you want to be able to take care of people, right? And
Right.
so it's like, gosh, if this all dries up, what are we going to do? It'd be nice to have some people that can help, steer that ship. And also, like, I think again, you intuited like it's just kind of the end of a cycle for me. Like, I just wasn't as interested in the work anymore. I love the work of engineering the system of a company, like
Right.
all the things that make people happy and make clients happy and have them come to us and make engineers, happy to do the work. And like building all that up is really rewarding and really fun for me. And that's what I realized. I was like, oh, I don't really want to build launch sites anymore. Like I've been doing this. If you count SpaceX to selling the company, it was just under, I think it was like 8 years, almost 10
Right.
years, right? It's a significant chunk. And so I just realized like I wasn't as excited to get up and go to the office. My mind was always elsewhere. And really, I was just burned out. I was tired. It's just been a long kind of like an existential like run. It's just like I
Right.
started the company because I had to eat. And then it's like, here we are. Now it is what it is. It's just like, if
Yeah.
somebody else has excitement for it and thinks they can take it to the next level, then I was very happy to hand it off and sell it to them and let them have a swing at it. So I think the biggest piece for me has been just like getting a big rest period. um, I felt a huge desire just to go jump right into the next thing, but also like, who knows if when I'll get another rest period. I hadn't had one yet in my life. Like, let's take one. And so that has ended up like really spawning a lot of creativity, and a lot of interesting things have come out of that. And so now I'm starting to get excited about like what could be next and what pieces I could put together. But man, it's just such a personal thing. It's really hard to know, but
Right.
I feel like when you know. Um, I'll say one other thing. My wife Jenny has this really cool thing called mixed emotions,
Okay.
and it's a card deck, and it's
Huh.
30 emotions. And
All right.
so literally I was like, how would it feel to sell? And I just started flipping through the emotions, and all the ones that came up, I put them down. And then
Right.
there they are. I was like, and how would it feel to like keep running the company? And I flip through and I put them there. And then you can kind of step back and you don't have to, you can just look at them and you're like,
Right.
oh yeah. And that gave me the chance to like really go deep into it, such that, when I made the choice to do it, it was like, great. Um, and what was really funny about that is I did that process. I was either going to go raise a round of venture capital finally after all these years, or I was going to sell the business. And did this mixed emotions process, I did all these things, and literally, like, can't make this stuff up. Like a month or two after, I was like, I think I'm going to try to sell the company.
Hmm.
Got an offer, and I was not shopping it. It was just
Right.
like, you're ready. The
Right.
universe is lining this up, and like, here's the offer. And so I
Right.
was like, well, that's a pretty strong sign. I'm going with it.
Got
And
it.
so yeah,
Yeah. I really like that that deck of like just emotion cards. I think we need to have set something like that up in our Scott Grad Lounge.
yeah,
And whenever grad students are struggling with some research ideas, we need to just have that deck ready for them. Like,
yeah,
how do you feel? Are you driven for this? Which idea are you driven for? And then kind of crack
yeah.
that out there. Yeah, that's
That'd
a
be
really
great.
nice insight. Yeah. Uh, the and so I guess going on the, I'm kind of thinking what exactly would be. I think going on the track of, as an engineer, maybe not having all the skills to run a company and then make a lot of these decisions maybe as acutely as possible as someone who's, studying business and stuff like that. I was wondering, I saw that in your profile that you were part of the Business Builders Club at OSU.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so I think maybe you perhaps had some interest in running a business, and as you said,
definitely.
as you were involved with your dad in that business in Alaska. So I was wondering what kind of advice you would give to younger students right now who engineers primarily always think of being an employee. Maybe not a lot of them think of, you know, doing their own thing. Uh, what advice would you give them? Like, if they are kind of, they have that small spark that I want to pursue my idea, but can I
Mhm.
do it? Can I not do it? Do I have the skill set?
Yeah,
What do
I
you
would
build?
say,
Yeah.
yeah, I'd say a few things. One, I don't think I don't want to pick on business majors in any way, but I think a lot of the complexity in business is driven by the need to make it seem complex so these guys have
Right.
jobs. Uh, that's why everything's an acronym, you know.
Right.
But really, it's. I mean, for all the thermodynamicist kids out there, right? It's like energy in, energy stored, energy out, right? It's an energy balance.
That's right.
Business is a money balance. Are you
That's right.
making slightly more money than you're spending? You're in business, you know. And things like debt and stuff can change that, but it's like fundamentals, right? Like
Right.
you got to. And so if you, excuse me, I think engineers do really well with the technical side.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and a lot of the companies that I advise, I do equity advising for some startups, and one of them's working on a cool lunar application, and but they're very focused on this is the engineers, right? How's this wheel going to work? And how's this motor? I'm like, well, but you don't know yet because you don't know what the market is. Like,
Mm.
is it this big? Is it the size of this room?
Right.
And they're like, well, we don't know. I was like,
Right.
exactly, because you don't. And so like getting some of those skills, and this is where business, I think the business majors can really be helpful, or even taking some business classes. I took some business classes at OSU and I had a great time with it. Or failing that, go into the entrepreneur club, right?
Right.
Where you start to think about these things. And it's like, well, yeah, Ben, that's like a really cool technology, but nobody's going to pay for it. It's like, yeah, I've got the world's most expensive ballpoint pen. And it's
Right.
like, nice. And is it really that? Is it really 100 times better than
Right.
another pen? No. Does it look 100 times better? So maybe like a fancy watch,
Right.
like people, it's a status object people want. No. And so you start to kind of learn those trades. And I've got a bunch of friends from Business Builders Club that I still stay in contact with today. And um, I think that, yeah, it's really cool. So my advice, I guess, to the engineers is like, get reps. Like,
Hmm.
go pitch an idea that you think is brilliant. Don't make people sign NDAs.
Right.
Nobody's stealing your idea. That's like,
Right.
if they can do it better, let them go do it better. And go pitch your idea. And when somebody tells you it's insane or bad or whatever, ask why. Like,
Hmm.
oh, why? Oh, why? And sometimes they'll be right, and sometimes they'll be wrong, but that lets
Right.
you practice, and so your pitch will just keep getting better and better and better until you'll be able to just hit it somebody with an idea, and they're like, "Wow, that sounds really smart." It's
Right.
like, "Cool. Now maybe you're in business," you know?
Right. Got it. Got it. Uh, the the other, and I know that I think we are kind of nearing the end of the session, so I'll try to wrap up with the condensed group of questions towards the end. Uh,
Okay.
the the question that I had, and I think maybe we didn't discuss as much as about your research while you were a grad student
Oh,
here.
yeah.
So I was wondering, like, what that work was like, and then how that also translated throughout your career trajectory. Do you feel that the research you do as a master student, it's more about the soft skills that you learn, or it's really about the specific topic? Uh, and yeah.
Yeah. I think for me, it was not about the specific topic. I loved the lab I worked in. Everybody was very cool. My advisor was great. Dr. Prakash. And, you know, I knew that I could fabricate. I was a pretty good fabricator. I do work on machines and stuff, and he needed somebody at the time that could like fabricate some things. And I was like, cool, I can do that.
Right.
And I knew that I could, then learn a lot being around
Hmm.
these PhD students and all these other people. But no, like, before I came at UAF, my capstone was, well, I was in the student rocket club there, We launched a suborbital rocket to study the aurora borealis. We flew on the Vomit Comet with a little prototype CubeSat, and then my capstone was designing a wind turbine for rural Alaska, out of parts that you could find kind of like in a typical, small community. And then I went to grad school and did micro nanofluidics for, 2 years. And then I didn't touch it again, right? I went and did extremely macro fluidics with
Right.
rockets. So
Right.
uh and so like I think it's about the toolbox.
Mm.
Like, I learned how to think, I learned how to research a problem, I learned to check my own assumptions. I knew where the weak points in my thinking were, where I would be likely to use magical thinking or jump over some fuzzy details, and, like, that really made me strong, and,
Right.
I really think that that is what's valuable, unless and some people, like, are in love with their topic, and they're like, "I'm gonna get a PhD, and I'm gonna be a professor, I'm gonna do this forever." It's like, awesome, but for
Right.
me, it was more about filling my toolbox with different tools, and now as a mechanical engineer with all those experiences, it's like, "Well, shoot, I think we could design anything,"
Right.
right? We just go back to, and it's about first principles engineering,
Right.
and that's kind of what you're learning.
Got it. And I guess as a grad student, it's also more about like really applying it fundamentally and, having the concepts as clear as possible,
Yeah.
I suppose.
Yeah,
Great.
exactly.
Uh, and then I know that we don't have a lot of more time left, so I guess I'll start with my usual wrap up question that I try to get and see what advice you have. So my last question for all the guests on the podcast is that what advice you would give to current grad students who are just starting out their degree, who are somewhere maybe in the middle of their degree, and
Yeah.
students who are like ready to graduate. They're in their last semester, wrapping things up. What kind of advice would you give?
Yeah, I think, the advice I give people just starting out is be really curious, again, like, dig into the problem, and even if it's like, "Oh, I don't really get this research," or, "I don't really like," or, like, blah, blah, like, take from it what you can take from it, like, do that work, go really deep on it, and make the most of it.
Right.
For people midway through, I hope that you'd start to learn, about what sort of jobs are interesting, what
Mm.
sort of things what do I like about the work I've done so far? What do I not like about the work I've done so far?
Right.
How does that translate to the job market? Maybe you start going to networking events and you're telling people like, I really like, this piece of analysis, but
Mm.
I don't really like doing this. And then the people are like, yeah, here's this job that does that. You're like, oh wow.
Right.
But keeping the aperture open, right? You
Right.
never know where you're going to end up. And I think that that is really critical. And then for people on the way out into graduation, I think the biggest thing I tell young people, and I say this mostly to high school to undergrad, but I think it encapsulates grad school too, is like, don't let the clay harden. Don't
Mm.
be like, okay, now this is who I am now. I do this for the rest of my life. I mean, if you want
Right.
to do this, great. But don't feel like you're making decisions from 18 to 23 that have to define you until you're 70, right? Like, be willing to adapt and to iterate and to continue practicing these things. And you can live a pretty big wild life if you're open to taking the
Right.
ride.
Right.
Yeah.
That's great advice. And I think the last kind of follow up thing that I had on that topic, especially since you're also guiding younger entrepreneurs, and right now, big buzzword I suppose across all industries has become AI. So I was
Yeah.
wondering and as mechanical engineers, we are not really doing AI. Like computer
Yeah.
science folks they're working in that area, but it's
Sure.
kind of seeping into all aspects of our lives now slowly.
Yeah.
So is there any skill set that you think that you're telling the younger entrepreneurs to kind of bank on, like with these new technologies coming up? Any way you see it's beneficial for mechanical engineers?
Yeah, I think I've been thinking quite a lot about it. I mean, I think AI is a really strong synthesis engine.
Hmm.
It's a really strong regurgitation engine.
Hmm.
But like it can't create.
Right.
And certainly, once you leave the realm of ones and zeros, it can't touch you. There was this like meme going around a long time ago. It was a billboard or an ad on the side of a building in San Francisco, and it said, "Hey, ChatGPT, finish this building." And right. And
Right.
so a lot of what I'm looking at next is in manufacturing, and those are the spaces I think are about to have a little bit of a renaissance. There
Hmm.
will be a lot of optimizations driven by, I think some of these models. on design,
Hmm.
but they're not going to be running the machines. They're not going to be integrating the systems together. A good friend of mine here in Alaska, who's a very successful investor and business owner, he's begging all his kids to get philosophy degrees
Hmm.
and go in and then figure out how to like build things, because that's like the thing that's going
Right.
to matter is like making meaning, making understanding, and synthesizing new things.
Right.
Um, last thing I'll say about it is like, if you're, we met on LinkedIn. Everybody on LinkedIn is posting these like AI based prompts of like,
Right.
and it's like that's going to get really boring really fast. The
Right.
people
Right.
who have real experiences, unique voices, I think have a
Hmm.
chance to stand out. And I think it's just as true in engineering. If you have a unique perspective and a unique set of skills that you're constantly honing, I don't think you have much to worry about.
Right.
If you want to sit in a room and do something that can be done in a book, then maybe it's a
Right.
different story. So
Right. Right. Yeah, perfect. And I think that really ties in well with all of the points that you kind of mentioned, that, if you're a curious person doing research and looking for new ideas, the notion of value creation kind of comes in that, I guess, in that thought process, which is becoming more important as a lot of the bottlenecks of doing things maybe can be helped with all of these AI tools and stuff like that, I guess.
yeah,
Uh, Perfect. And I see that we are kind of running out of time here. So
sure.
anything else that you would like to share or plug in? I know you have a website, you have a wonderful newsletter. I think you're working
Oh,
on a book. I can share links for all of those if you would feel
sure.
all right.
Yeah, I'll just, yeah, briefly, I write a semi-periodic 2 weeks to a month newsletter on kind of the human side of being in these like really stressful, like
Hmm.
high performing situations, and how I think we can do them better, and kind of exploring the humanity of that. I'm writing a book about all the people and crazy adventures that I got to enjoy, from being a bush pilot to launching to landing rockets to building a business here in Alaska. And my website is just myname.com, benkelly.com. And I love working with deep tech companies and engineers that are trying to get to the next critical milestone. So if I can ever be helpful to anybody, I'd love to hear from them. And thank you so much for having me on the pod. It's really fun.
Yeah. Thanks very much for making time for this. Yeah, we're glad that we could have you on, and I'll be happy to share everything in the description. For all of our listeners, I'll also post links to all of our other social media handles where you can even view shorts for these podcasts. But the entire episodes will be available on YouTube. And Ben, thanks once again very much for making time for this.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Have a good day. Take care.
Yeah.